Today on the 700 Club Canada, it's the best of 2021. We'll look at the issues that challenged us this past year. Well, welcome to a special edition of 700 Club Canada. I love this, Bill. We get to look back over the year and, reflect on what's happened on the show.
Yeah, and great men and women who have inspired us and the moments that really challenged us. And that's what we're looking at today. Yeah. Some of those moments that were kind of convicting, challenging, which is good. We need that.
Well, you know what? I find that I learn a lot from every guest. I mean, yes, the testimonies, but especially in the interviews and some of the panel discussions we had this year, there were some heavy topics.
Yeah.
Over 2021. 2020 and 2021, it's all a blur to me now, I think, but some difficult topics that we addressed.
But I think sometimes we need to talk about things.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we're afraid to talk about them, but I think if we listen with open ears and hearts, that we can actually learn a lot from people, especially people who are different than us or have a different perspective than us or a different experience than us.
Yeah.
And instead of just trying to dismiss it or say, that's not my problem, what I loved is we really leaned into how can we learn and how can we be better together?
Well, we had conversations with the Indigenous community, many of the struggles that have gone on there and the unmarked graves. And then we had, discussions about discrimination and racism against Asians and Black community. And having a posture of listening has been a real lesson to me this year. I think to everyone, we need to just slow down and listen to each other.
Well, what I love about it is I think we can dismiss it as not my problem, but it's our problem as humanity.
Yeah.
And so by listening and learning, I think we are better. And I think that's the first step to healing. Yeah. And I was really excited that we got the opportunity to listen this year.
And actually, I think it's a strength of Canadians.
I think so.
I do. I love our nation. And I think as Canadians, we're pretty good at listening. So, kudos to all of you out there that are learning to listen well to your neighbors. Well, first thing today, we'll revisit our interviews with Kenny Blacksmith and an incredible panel of Indigenous leaders from across Canada. This was fire.
They say we were about 500,000 people, First Nation and Inuit in Canada. 150,000 children were taken away.
Oh.
That's like 30% of the population was ripped out of the natural homes and the communities, and that really affected our people.
Certainly,
And so, having said that, the churches today have a greater responsibility to mend the distrust that was there,
right,
and now the mistrust that is there again as a result of these graves that have been found that were once hidden.
Would you pray now for the Indigenous communities across Canada? Would you pray for the church as we seek to see healing across our land?
Father, we thank you that we have this opportunity to come together. We thank you for the power of your forgiveness on our lives. And we acknowledge the healing that comes from the release of forgiveness. And we also know the one that will benefit the most from releasing forgiveness is the one that forgives. And not necessarily should we be troubled whether or not one receives the forgiveness. But Lord, we ask that there be a spirit of reconciliation, a spirit of healing that will come through forgiveness.
Reconciliation this day actually was part of the TRC's mandate in 2015 that there would be a day similar to November 11th where we stop, we pause, and we reflect, just like what the guys were saying, to remember what happened in our history, Canadian history, that so many have come to understand was a dark chapter, and to figure out how do we move this needle forward and how do we do relationship together.
So good. Well, we're looking forward to learning from all three of you today. Carmen, let me start with you. You said we aren't a problem to be fixed, but a relationship to nurture. Tell us what that should look like.
As friends. And this was the original intention when first contact happened, is that we started out with a great relationship as friends. We were helping one another, but that hospitality was abused. And we don't want to walk forward in that anymore. We want to walk forward in relationship.
Yes.
In a healthy relationship.
That's a great word. Crystal, what's your response to that?
Well, I think Carmen said it so eloquently. It just narrows down to relationship, because I think before Kamloops to Kamloops, before that discovery happened, people looked at Indigenous people with the typical stereotypes. Well, they're just drunk, lazy, and they live off the system. But in relationship, you'll discover that we are some of the kindest, we're some of the most generous people who would be willing to give you the shirt off our back if you just got to know us. And we are not those stereotypes, we're not those labels. And so journeying together in relationship, you'll discover that who we are and who God's created us to be as gatekeepers is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's so important. You know, we've spoken of trauma, and it's not healed in a day, is it? So what are some of the challenges that need to be addressed to see greater healing in our land? Barry?
Well, I'd like to circle back to what covenants that would come forth, and that we would flow down the river of life together, not as father and son, but as brothers, and that we would have each other's best interest, and we would work together and flow together. And we need to get back to partnership. We cannot have negotiations without proper representation. We must have what we're doing today, Lori, and that is communication. There must be more communication. We must work together. We must begin to love together. We must honor each other. And we must, like the good book says, honor and prefer one another over ourselves, and forgiveness.
Well, I am truly thankful for the reminder that the only way we're going to heal is to acknowledge, but then also extend forgiveness.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people are hesitant to forgive because they think it means forgetting, and we don't forget.
Yes.
That's not the point. It's remembering so that we can heal, acknowledge what needs to be healed, confess, and forgive one another. And I love that about that panel discussion.
Well, I found the whole experience just very humbling.
Yeah.
And the posture of the leaders. And I mean, Chief Kenny said it best, really, like, if we all learn to forgive each other, it frees, you are freed when you extend forgiveness, right?
Right. And I love how Carmen talked about friendship.
Yes.
And I think the only way to break us and them is to make it us, to eliminate them. And the only way to eliminate us and them is to befriend people, hear their story, sit down at a table, have a meaningful conversation. I think that is a huge step that we all could do better at. Invite people to your table who maybe you want to know their story, you don't understand it, and listen. Again, we come back to that.
Well, Crystal reminded us just to challenge our own stereotypes that we hold of people.
Right.
And I think that has been the challenge of not only this last year, but these last two years. We all have to be honest that we have biases.
Yes.
And they're there because of our own historical experiences.
Yes.
So if we can get really honest about our biases, then we can get honest about the fact that we can break down some of those biases by listening and leaning in. And you know what? It's so true, Bill. It happens in relationship.
Absolutely.
When you see people for them being people.
Well, I always use an analogy, you know, as long as we have a defensive position on either side of the argument, it's really hard to approach people when you're like this, but when you are able to open up your hands and be receptive to one another, both those who maybe have caused the hurt and those who have been hurt, we can do this by opening up our heart. And I think that's what Jesus does. His forgiveness allows us to open up and receive one another.
Yeah, so good. And now we continue our look back at the issues that affected us this past year with two women who've made it their mission to save others trapped in the sex trafficking industry.
This amazing campaign called Be Amazing Campaign. I love your button. So why did you create this?
Well, I started teaching 40 years ago and taught life skills to inner city youth to keep young people out of gangs and out of the sex industry. And then I learned that Canada is actually a destination for human sex trafficking and child sex trafficking. I was absolutely shocked and decided I got to put an end to this. So I've started my campaign. I mean, it's an awful subject, so I'm trying to be upbeat and positive, but I do want to give everybody some stats so you all know what I'm talking about. The average age for recruiting for the sex industry in Canada, and think of Vancouver and Toronto as the hotspots, is age 13. Indigenous are severely overrepresented. It is the fastest growing crime in Canada. And in British Columbia, where I'm from, there is no public awareness. So that's why I've really jumped in on this to try to raise public awareness. My goal is to traffic-proof every community in BC. How do I do that? Public awareness and education. That really is our greatest weapon. I'm an educator, so I talk about this issue to the 3 Ps, to politicians, to the police, and to the public. And what I give them is the 2 Es. We want enforcement of the law and education. So 3 Ps, 2 Es. Christians don't want to hear about this nasty stuff. And we are supposed to be the light and salt of the world. We've got to dig in, deeper dive, and deal with these tough issues. And the reality is the sex industry wants your children. They are targeting Christian girls. They're wholesome, they're clean, they're healthy, and they're unsuspecting. You've got to know about this issue.
Well, as a father of a beautiful daughter, I want to just thank you for being a champion for this cause. I want to just thank you for being a voice for maybe those who don't feel they have a voice.
Can you tell us, you survived 15 years in the commercial sex trade. Take us back and tell us how it all started, Katerina.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think it really started from childhood. There was a lot of sexual abuse going on when I was a little girl, which kind of led me vulnerable into a lot of abusive relationships. And I had married a man who was very abusive. And a friend of both of ours ended up killing this man. And he involved me after the fact and kind of held me and my kids hostage for 3 years and wanted me to deter the police by joining a women's abuse support group. And I did. And in there, I met a woman who was a pimp, and she lured me into the sex trade.
Well, what happened that eventually you got out? Did God play a role in that?
Oh, God played a huge role. God has a huge sense of humor, I always say. It was actually a client who had got me out of the sex trade. And he took me out, and I became his private prostitute. And 3 years later, he left me. I had nothing. And my daughter, Deidre, she was a Christian. Like, I think when she was 12, she became Christian, and I was in the game. And she would pray for me. She'd post scriptures on my door, all kinds of stuff. And I really hated God. I really hated him. And 3 years of being with this man and him leaving me, I thought that I was going to have to go back to what I knew. Right. So I called my daughter and I told her, and she was devastated. And she had youth leaders in her church, and she called them and they offered to help me out. You know, once I got out, I wanted to scream from the mountaintops. I wanted people to know the truth, that it's not a choice, that it's lack of choice. It's, you know, trauma that's happened to somebody that leaves them vulnerable to even think this is a decision. And I wanted to tell people that. So I started sharing my story, and my mentors came alongside of me, and we decided to, you know, get Rising Angels going so that we could help women. So we mentor women. So I'll get the 2, 3 in the morning calls from these women who are, you know, having issues, or the girls that I mentor are just struggling and they'll need somebody to talk them down. And that's where I come in. We help them financially. We run a church now for women every Wednesday on Zoom.
What can the average person do to help fight against this crime?
So education is key. Keeping your eyes open. If something doesn't look right, you know, talk to somebody who knows, talk to the police, talk to victim services, talk to Rising Angels. If something doesn't seem right, it's probably not right.
Yeah.
So just be aware and educate other people of what's going on, especially your children.
You know, something I really appreciate, Bill, as we had conversations with Kathy and Katerina, we're not glossing over these tough issues in our culture.
No.
And both of them emphasize the need for education. I don't know about you, but I have been educated through my conversations with them. And the many stories that we share here. We don't gloss over the reality of the sex trafficking industry. We tell many testimonies about it, but I really appreciate the insight both Kathy and Katerina gave us.
Yeah, and I think, and I use this word carefully, many of us are ignorant. I don't mean that in a total negative sense, just unaware.
Yes.
We've turned a blind eye to some of the real issues. And again, we project our own bias, as you already said, onto them. And really, we think, oh, it'll never happen to me, it'll never happen to my family.
Yeah.
But we learned in these interviews that yes, it can happen to anybody, and we all need to be aware. And it's only when we work together that we're going to actually find the solution.
Well, and you said, I mean, you have a beautiful daughter. I mean, I have a daughter. Like, the reality that this is happening in our backyards, in suburbia Canada. It is not isolated. In fact, the region that Bill and I live in, this 401 corridor is one of the most highly trafficked areas in Canada. And we need to be more aware. We need to know what to look for, be better educated.
And you know what I loved about our guests this year? Yes, they educated us and they informed us of the real issues, but they also gave us hope. They gave us, here's some things that we can do practically. Yeah. All of us can actually do something. We're not helpless. It's not hopeless. It's not over. And I love that, the hope that they instilled by encouraging us on what we could do, practical ways that we could make a difference. And I really valued that.
And actually, that is the thrust of this ministry. We will tell real stories. We'll even tell the difficult things. But in the end, we're giving a message of hope. Yes. And we're giving a message of help, next steps, right?
It's always about hope and help. I love that. Yeah. Well, the pandemic and lockdowns really did take a toll on many of us. So after the break, we'll look back at the powerful week tackling the subject of mental illness.
What do I enjoy most about what I do? Well, that's easy. I love connecting with people, especially when someone says, I am so glad I can talk with you. I really need prayer. That's God's perfect timing. I talk with people all the time who want prayer for a family situation. Sometimes it's prayer for an emotional or physical need, or even a financial breakthrough. It's so amazing that I can share about God's love and encourage people. I love this Bible verse. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. God is at work. I've seen him answer prayer. Won't you call today? 1-855-759-0700. God bless you.
We're learning so much today. So let me ask our experts, what coping strategies do we often resort to deal with stress and anxiety? And how has the pandemic impacted these? Andrew?
One of the coping strategies that may take various forms is avoidance and distraction. Wow. And the truth is, we do need a break. We do need to be able to reset. The challenge is when we engage in things that don't prepare us to re-engage, that don't rejuvenate us, that don't empower us to, feel better and think better. A lot of the times we want to feel better, but we don't realize we won't be able to feel better unless we're thinking better. So finding coping strategies that help us to pull away, but to come back to these situations, I think is really, really critical. One of the things that I do is I journal. It is a lifeline for me, and it helps me to see, okay, what am I thinking? How am I feeling? What do I want to think? How do I want to feel? And then I can re-engage with the situation. The situation hasn't changed, but I have. So I think employing coping strategies that move us beyond coping to actually addressing and thriving, that's important.
So what are some practical steps people can take to deal with stress and anxiety and experience wholeness? And when we say wholeness, we mean physical, relational, spiritual, emotional wholeness. Mary?
Yeah, when people have anxiety, they can often end up becoming anxious about anxiety. They become scared of it. And so I think changing your relationship with anxiety, recognizing that anxiety is a very natural response to a perceived threat, whether it's real or not. So if we can give ourselves self-compassion and grace and accept that in our humanity, these are normal responses to have, it actually gives us that additional resilience to tolerate those intense emotions and kind of realize that we're going to be doing okay. Yeah. So I would just encourage people who struggle with anxiety, don't be beating yourself up. Life is hard when you're trying to push through white knuckling it. So when you can give yourself that empathy that your soul needs and that acceptance and compassion, that is going to increase your ability to handle it.
What are they seeing what are you seeing in your practice in the area of suicide? Like, what are the factors behind the climbing rates? Harrison?
I've been seeing a lot of individuals who have ideations and thoughts of wanting to harm themselves. I've actually lost 3 from suicide in my practice, I would say. That was unexpected. Yeah, it was.
I'm so
it's
sorry.
just kind of, you know, it's very heartfelt to just think about how someone can reach a point in life where, well, they don't see hope and not really appreciate you bringing this, because this is a very tough topic. We have over 10 Canadians per day that commit suicide in our country. And it's just getting worse with this pandemic because people are very hopeless.
Right.
You know, and it's growing. It's a growing epidemic, and I think people just don't know what to do. And so a program like this, that we can really put the seed of hope that God has a plan for our lives and we don't need to end it. I think that's really the greatest seed we can plant in the hearts of individuals pertaining to suicide.
What I really appreciate about those panels is that they talked about a very difficult subject that right now our culture is actually bringing a lot of awareness around.
That's right.
And I think there's a lot of good to that, because if you bring those things into the light, they can be healed. And I think a lot of us, again, we're unaware of how devastating mental illness can really be. I just know in our own life group, we had a situation, and as we started talking about it, so many expressed different facets, different ways they've battled, especially in this pandemic. And so we need experts who are helping us navigate so we can be completely who we were created to be, not just forgiven from our sin, but healed body, mind, and spirit.
Yeah, and I loved many of the things that were practical about, you know, journaling, like putting healthy habits in your life, which we all need to counteract some of the mental, emotional stress, certainly through a pandemic.
Yes.
But just like the strategies that we're giving, and Dr. Mary, I believe she was the one who said, we have to have a different relationship with anxiety. Like we have to view it differently.
Right.
And I just thought that's a really good perspective. Like, how do you view emotions in your life? And something I learned this year, and it was through this show, that emotions they're indicators. They're not to be ignored. They're indicators. They're telling you something. So don't ignore them. Don't pretend. Don't avoid, which we often do.
Right.
Pay attention, because they're indicating, they're telling you something, and that's, you can take steps for moving forward. You don't have to get stuck in the emotion.
Right.
But they are telling you something.
Well, and they're terrible directors. So keep them as indicators. It's like your dashboard, right? We talked about this. When a light pops up, it doesn't mean your whole car is about to shut down. It just means deal with that. It's a legitimate issue, and if you to pay attention to it, it can be resolved. And if you don't, it will impact the whole car. And so I think to pay attention. I love that idea. Just pay attention to what's really going on, and by asking good questions of what's going on around you as well.
And call for help. That's why we're here 24/7. Our prayer lines are here to help people, and we know that it's helped many people this year. We'll be right back.
Well, hey friends, Stephen Carlton here in the Arctic Cove studio. Just wanted to thank you, 700 Club Canada partners, for standing with the Bill Prankin Evangelistic Association. What it means for us is that we're able to take the gospel, the power of God at work, to communities across Nunavut, First Nation reserves across mainland Canada, and really just see people encounter God in the most powerful way. Thank you for standing with us.
Well, Christmas is a time of giving. I love it so much. It's not really what we receive, but it is what we give. And I want to thank you for giving to this ministry, but remind you that the year is coming to an end. And as we give at the end of the year, it's not just to gain that tax receipt, which is obviously a great feature in our country of Canada. We're grateful for it. But it's truly to be giving out of generosity towards the missions and the charities that you love. So if you love what we're doing here on 700 Club Canada, want to be a partner, join us today. You can start as low as $20 a month or more as a monthly giver. And if you're an existing partner, maybe you want to think about increasing and going to the next giving level. Why don't you pray about that? Ask God, how could you even give more generously, and get your donation in quickly because the year is almost coming to an end. We have a free gift for those who joined us as monthly partners, The Nearness of Heaven. Why don't you give us a call at 1-855-759-0700.
What does Jesus mean that the kingdom of heaven is within you or within your midst? The kingdom of God is at hand. That means you can literally reach up and grab it. His presence is right there with you. If you're saved, if you're a Christian, Jesus is dwelling in your heart.
I think the Lord was preparing me, like, you're about to enter a battle, but I am with you.
He is the God that can make the impossible possible.
In this life, please love God. Seek Him first.
He always knew where I was, and He was there with open arms.
No matter what we go through, God is there to help us through.
All these things will be added unto you.
Jesus loves you.
You can't even imagine what God has for you.
The Nearness of Heaven. Available now.
Well, I don't know about you, but watching those episodes again really challenged me. And as counterintuitive as it is, I actually like being challenged.
Yeah.
Because I believe that if I can learn in that process, I can be better. And that's what we really all want.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of us set New Year's resolutions. Yes. I don't know whether you do that or not. But you know what? As we think this time of year, that's what we're kind of getting. And part of New Year's resolutions is like thinking about how can you grow? How can you learn? What could be better, even better if in the next year?
Absolutely.
Right? And so I do think it's important to look back and have an honest reflection at your year. And how did you respond to some of these difficult topics? Like, what was your response? What did you learn as you heard these guests? And what is going to be your response moving forward, you know, as you've been inspired by what you've heard?
That is so good.
I come up with good things.
You do all the time. but I think the reality, yeah, a lot of us maybe in the moment we feel the emotion, in the moment we say, yeah, I'm going to do something. But if it doesn't actually change us, and by change, I don't mean the way you think about it only, but in your actions, your attitudes, really it was wasted. And so that's a great question. How are you going to allow the things we walk through together to change you for the better? Wow.
Well, you know what I heard from, I think, Chris Chase. You did some segments with Chris.
Yes.
And there was some really practical stuff there about, like, who are your relationships in your life?
Right.
Right? Like, you can't just look at some of these issues that happen across our nation and relate to them if you can't relate to your neighbor next door.
Absolutely. Well, and you can't really understand a person until they're your friend. You really can't.
That's right.
Until you've walked through a couple of difficult situations together.
Yeah.
And I think that's important as well.
So maybe a goal this year is, you know, to build more relationships, people that you don't yet know, truly to be their friend and to listen.
I just came up with this right now. You ready?
Oh, okay.
Listen, learn, love.
Oh, there it is. See, Bill comes up with great stuff too, all the time. Thanks for that, Bill. That is so great. And thank you.
Yes.
We love you. And thank you so much for your support and for watching each day.
To contact us, visit 700club.ca.